historical context, cultural awareness, and empathetic rigor are important for storytelling. I think it's important, like you're saying, just, as being a citizen of the world. I kind of I think about it in terms of being stewards of the future. We inherited decisions and consequences of decisions that people made before us. And people after us, are going to inherit our decisions and the consequences of our decisions. And so I think, whether you're telling stories, whether you're writing about something, whether you're consuming media, it is important to be aware that we don't exist in a vacuum, that, we didn't just spring out of some primordial goo. Like, historical context, I think, is something that we are losing sight of rapidly. And this isn't something that I would necessarily like lay blame on any one particular person's feet. I think, given the media landscape today and the fact that we are being bombarded by so much information constantly, it's hard to remember something from 2 weeks ago, let
Right.
alone historical information from decades ago or even centuries ago. But I think if you're going to tell a story, whether it's fiction, whether it's creative nonfiction, whether it's reporting, whether it's, you know, doing the historical research, going into the archives, looking at stuff, listening to oral histories, getting an understanding of the history of whatever it is that you're talking about is really important, so that you can talk about it in a way that future people are going to be able to read it. And like you're saying about, being kind of like an ethical reader in a way, you know what I mean? You want to be able to convey the right information. um, Cultural awareness, I think it's kind of the same thing, but different in, again, we don't exist in a vacuum. And our perspectives are not the only perspectives. Everybody has a different lens, everybody has a different background from which they're approaching, a particular thing, whether it's somebody that you're interviewing for a story, or whether it's somebody that you're writing about for a creative nonfiction project, or, so just being aware that not everybody is like you. Not
Right.
everybody is going
Yeah.
to think the way
Yeah.
you do. Not everybody's going to react the way you do. Not everybody's going to have the same background, I guess, that you do, for lack of a better word, is really important. And then empathy for me in my own creative practice, and I guess in other work that I'm really drawn to, I think empathy is something that we're losing sight of also. I mean, I have been kind of dancing around politics, but, we've become so polarized that, it's becoming increasingly impossible, I think, for people to dredge up, a kind of sense of empathy and compassion. And that is something that separates us. That is something that, makes us human, I think, is this ability to be able to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, or respect somebody else's feelings. And so I think it's a radical act to be able to find empathy for people, and for yourself, and for whatever it is that you're encountering to write about, or, you know, paint, or, cook, or, I mean, whatever. I think just being able to like find empathy is a good skill to have. And I think is a worthwhile practice. And it is something that takes practice. It's not
For sure.
easy.
For
We just
sure.
watched the presidential debate. Like, finding empathy is not easy. But that's what makes it radical, I think. And I really firmly believe in the power of that.
Well, I mean, and to just add on to that, I mean, you talked about this conversation wading into politics a little bit, which is fine. We can do that. There's no rule, I guess. I make the rules, so whatever. Um, um, but what you're talking about, like a lack of empathy or a lack of being willing to compromise, or, if you take away that manifesting in our national politics, I see that kind of stuff just in everyday interactions with people that have nothing to do with politics.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
with people who, like, maybe, and I hate to even say like sides, but even with people who might be on the same side as me politically, right? Like,
Right.
that's that. So I don't know if, like, that's an issue of, like, the internet age maybe, or,
Yeah.
uh, you know,
We've
yeah.
we've become increasingly disconnected from each other. Like, I mean, you and I are doing this having this chat right now, and it seems like we're in the same room, but we're not. Like, we're separated by a screen, and I read somewhere that screens trick you into thinking that you are having communion with another person, and so we think that we're well connected with each other, and we think that we, have community and all of these things because we can check in with our friends by text, or we can FaceTime our parents, or we can, Slack and Zoom and Skype and all of these things. But like in reality, we spend more time in front of our screens than I think we do. Well, I'm not going to say we, I'm going to say me. I spend more time in front of my screen than I do with other human beings, and I think that's when you do start to see like that empathy being eroded. And, like you're saying, like it has nothing to do with politics, it, one of the things that always shocks people coming down anywhere to the South is that we don't honk our horns very often.
Mm,
That was something that I really appreciated living in Mississippi. People honk their horns a little bit in Tampa. I remember the first time I went to Washington, D.C., that was like the first air quotes big city that I ever went to. And I was shocked by the amount of times people were honking their horns at each other, like for no reason. Like I was always like, oh, like you honk your horn, like if somebody's about to hit you and you want to let them know that you're there. But like, you don't need to honk your horn because the light turned green and someone hasn't started driving in 4 seconds, or, I think it's that kind of thing that I'm starting to see. People are rude to each other at the grocery store, or, rude to people that don't have the same privilege that they do, and not being able to look beyond that. I realize I'm waxing philosophic, and you had me here to talk about writing, and instead I'm giving you my whole worldview. But yeah, I mean, I just think we've got to find a way to reconnect with one another. And I guess this is kind of related to, our discussions about Florida and my goal with my writing. I'm trying to find a way to get people to reconnect with Florida in a way that understands that there are people here,
mm,
that
yeah.
there are people here who think and who feel and who experience the world too. We don't just need to be sawed off from the continental United States and shipped out to sea. So I guess they kind of relate to each other in that way. I think if very broad scale, I want people to find empathy for this place that I live in. But, on a smaller scale, I think finding empathy for each other, on a daily basis is also really important.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Micromaker by Loose Leaf Transmissions. We hope you enjoyed this brief glimpse into the inner workings of the creative life. If this resonated with you, be sure to check out the full conversation on Music Maker with Tyler Kline, a podcast exploring craft and process, philosophy and inspiration, and the honest, often messy parts of being an artist, creative uncertainty, purpose and identity, and resilience. You can find Music Maker wherever you get your podcasts, or by visiting musicmakerpodcast.com.